So, Richard McLean, you're a producer, director, and technical director for the live multi camera video industry, and you have a specialization in live streaming. You're also an affiliate instructor for the University of Washington, where you teach a course called Building Community Through Live Streaming. And lastly, you're the founder for Relay Station, a company dedicated to creating interactive live streams for learning communities. We have so much history going back, working together. I'm so excited to delve into this just a little bit deeper. Welcome.
Happy to be here.
Yeah. So, how did you get into live streaming and what does all of this entail for you?
Yes, it's a good question. So live streaming way back in 2010, I graduated from Western Washington University up in Bellingham, and I'd been volunteering at a student TV station doing some sketch comedy shows. It's a show called You Would. It's kind of like an SNL thing where we do some filmed sketches as well as some live on stage sketches. Do it once a quarter, usually during finals week. And that's where I was cutting my teeth, is writing scripts. And I did a little bit of editing, but not too much. But there was a company called Varvid, and they're looking for interns. And they had bumped into some students who worked for the TV station at a coffee shop or something. They wanted an intern. They reached out to the program, and I applied for it. I got an email from the university saying this company is looking for interns. I applied, I got the internship, and started as an unpaid intern right out of college in 2010. And I did a lot of editing at first, corporate editing, and in the IT industry. So a lot of MSPs, managed service provider IT companies, where they would sell a subscription service to companies to manage their whole IT infrastructure for a monthly payment. And I did a lot of videos for vendors. Someone like Intel would be like, here's how this managed service provider is using Intel to run their IT company.
Okay.
And so I'd take the footage that these companies went out and shot, and then I'd edit together little case studies. And the company also was doing, at the time, called webcasting, not live streaming as we know it now, for Magic the Gathering Pro Tour.
Oh, that's
and
cool.
So that was the founder, Aaron Booker, had started that way back, I forget the year, but we're probably talking like 15, 20 years ago, starting early webcasting way back in the day for Magic the Gathering. And that's where he had built that skill set. And that's how I started getting introduced to that world. And I wasn't working on Magic the Gathering Pro Tour, but because the founder had those skills, as we're in the IT industry, we'd also be doing live streaming for corporate events, town hall meetings, that type of thing. Yeah. So a lot of the stuff, I was camera operator on small 2-3 camera live streams with a PowerPoint presentation. And so that's how I got into the industry. Yeah. And from there just kept evolving and eventually got opportunities to be a technical director and learned about actually encoding and all of that.
What was that transition like, going from being a camera operator to essentially calling the shots for doing live stream directing?
Yeah. I mean, the first few that I did were literally like someone standing at a podium with a PowerPoint presentation and 2 cameras. So it was like super, super simple, really hard to mess up the live calling, where if someone's not familiar, the different camera operators and different cameras each have a number. So camera 1, camera 2, and you call out over a headset to people which camera's live. And for the cameras that aren't live, you give them instruction on how you want to frame a shot differently, or how you might want them to move their camera somewhere else. And I mean, literally on those, you'd have a wide shot and a tight shot with 2 different cameras. And often the tight shot would stay the same as someone at a podium. And then when they reference the PowerPoint, you just dissolve to the PowerPoint, come back to the camera. So like really, it was pretty intuitive. And since I had been editing a lot, I had a sense of the timing and the rhythm of making cuts. And in terms of getting started with like multi-camera directing, it was about the easiest first step that you could have for that type of project.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, the editing background goes a really long way. So, little fun editing stuff for this wide angle right here, it captures both of us. And then when we cut to Richard's angle right here, and then my angle right here, like you said, you figure out the rhythm of how to cut between different things to kind of match the conversation, to match the flow and the things that they're referencing. So that's really cool. I could see how that was really, really helpful because the skills directly translate over.
Yeah, you got me thinking about something that bugs me, and maybe I just notice it because I work in this industry, but you can tell in a video when someone's made a cut because it's motivated and they're telling a story versus when they're hiding an edit. You know what I mean? And so that really bugs me when I can tell someone just tossed in a clip so they could hide an edit that they made versus it being motivated to actually illustrate something that the person's talking about or to further the story. And is that something you've ever noticed?
I notice it all the time. And actually, for this very podcast, in my editor's guide, a document I wrote for the style of this, I do my best to hide those exact things that you mentioned. Because in real time, one of us might need to go to the bathroom or we have a cough or something. So we're not going to want to show that. But what I do is I can't just cut between just myself or the wide camera because I'm going to notice the difference in my hands or body position or something like that. So I will cut to the person not speaking just long enough to kind of gauge their reaction.
Right.
So it feels motivated. And then I will cut back to the subject. So to the viewer, this looks perfectly hidden. But I do that because the edit required it because I'm removing chunks of time.
Right. I guess I do need to be clear, you often do need to hide edits.
Oh, yeah.
Do it in a way, I was thinking of a magician using misdirection.
I see what you're saying.
Regardless of two different editors maybe hiding an edit, right? But one is very obvious. And another one, there's a skillful way that it's integrated into the story as well, right? And I was thinking of how a magician uses misdirection, where the whole point is you're doing something that's so captivating to watch that you're missing the trick that's happening behind the scenes or behind their back or whatever. And so I don't know, that came to mind when you were talking about editing. I was like, I gotta squeeze this point in.
No, that's a great point. So I'll actually do something really clever right here. I will put this cup in the middle of the table and we're going to be talking and saying things. And then at some point, something is going to happen. We're going to cut to something else and the cup will go somewhere else. And it looks like a seamless conversation from the viewer's perspective. But now the cup is no longer there and they never saw it. It's magic. Yeah, that's really cool. But yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. So what does the day-to-day look like nowadays, now that you've been established in your career for a little bit and you're doing this as freelance? What's a typical day like on set for something that you do in this industry?
Yeah, so when I'm on set,
yeah,
a lot of it is, the nature of events is a lot of things are in flux. And a lot of people are very technically minded, but maybe not so much a project manager or communication oriented. So a lot of it is showing up kind of like a detective, figuring out who's on the team, what gear do we have lined up, what are we actually even doing here, and putting the pieces together, trying to build the plane as you're flying it. So a lot of and this isn't to knock anybody, it's just the nature of the live event industry. Yep. And so a lot of it is just going around talking to people, sometimes bumping into people I've worked with in the past, which can be helpful because you've got that relationship built. They can give you the inside scoop of what they know. And a lot of it is finding little pieces of the puzzle and trying to get the big picture figured out as soon as possible and understand how you can take initiative in your own position to support the team as a whole. There's a lot of times you don't get very specific, detail-oriented instructions, and you just have to use your intuition and experience to figure that out on set. So that's kind of a big picture when I'm first getting on site for a project of what the process looks like.
So on a previous episode with our mutual friend Oliver Stelfox, we were talking about what it's like on set and just the variety of problems that you deal with once you go in there. Because like you said earlier, there's not really a script or plan. There is, but it almost never goes to what it happens to be for in reality. So you have this Rolodex of problems and solutions that you've encountered over the years and the experience that you have, and you just start knocking these things out as they present itself. So this new problem pops up that you weren't expecting, but you solved this 2 years ago on this set, on this job, and now you know what to do. And you just constantly do this throughout the day.
Yeah, I've thought of it almost like an escape room where,
Yeah.
yeah, you're solving a puzzle, you're collaborating with other people. You to understand when it's best to just go do it yourself or when you need to check in with other people in other departments. Because sometimes you're like, oh, I'm solving a problem, but you didn't realize that somebody else needed something set up in a very particular way.
Yeah.
That if you make a change to that, it's going to influence something in someone else's department.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of making like that decision tree and following it is like, is this specifically related to me or who else does this decision involve and who do I need to talk to? And a quote that I think about a lot that relates to live streaming is a prototype is worth 1,000 meetings. And a lot of things, there's a lot of brainstorming, a lot of things get talked about leading up to a live event, a live stream, but a lot of it you just don't know for sure until you actually have the tangible thing in the real world.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times we're prototyping very quickly when we're loading in somewhere in a venue on site and learning how what we plan in a meeting may be a reality or may be not grounded in reality. And now we have to pivot and come up with a different way to solve that problem.
Yeah.
So yes, a lot of problem solving on the fly and drawing from what has worked in the past versus what hasn't worked in the past.
Do you have a favorite example that comes to mind of a problem that you've had to solve live on set?
Yeah, let me think about this. I mean, a lot of what's funny about this industry is a lot of times these problems that you're solving is kind of boring. It's like, oh, the projector won't get this video signal. And then you figure out it's a very specific format that we can use a hardware device to scale the signal, which means you may have a frame rate that's 2997, that's how many images a second you're seeing, yep. How many frames, and the projector may need 5994. So you use a device that scales the frame rate so that the projector can see the signal. It's not a very exciting or sexy problem to solve. And people in the audience are like, well, yeah, I just want to see the thing on the projector. But behind the scenes, there are a lot of little things like that come up and that you have to troubleshoot and problem solve that ultimately just make things worse or make things work. Yeah, not worse. Compared to like a cinematographer dialing in lighting and lenses, they ended up with like a really cool shot at the end of it. A lot of the stuff we're doing, something's just working properly. And so it's not as exciting to get to that point of something's working properly for maybe somebody on the outside, but somebody on our crew, there's a sense of ease and comfort. And we're like, oh, everything's working.
Yeah.
So I know that's not a very specific thing, but I think the reason why nothing specific is coming to mind right now is because there's nothing that's necessarily super exciting that sticks with me. I think it kind of fades into the background.
I know what you mean by that. Like, it's the same, 20 problems that you're going to encounter and just various, variations and configurations, but they all are more or less the same. Like you said, they're rarely sexy. Back at the house things are rarely, sexy, but it's still a problem you need to solve, and it's still absolutely critical that you do so the thing works properly. So earlier you mentioned as you kind of direct the various camera operators and you tell them, hey, we're jumping from camera 1 to 2, hey, now to 3, now back to 1. You obviously have a vision in mind of what you want to see. You have a composition and framing. You have an angle. You have an idea of what you want the subjects to be. So it's as if you are creating the images in your mind and you are putting those visions out to the camera operators and instructing them to then line up with what your vision is. So you're doing a lot of this on the fly. What is that like, and what are you experiencing, and what are you thinking about as these moments happen?
There's a lot. I think for context, compared to a film shoot where you say cut, you get everybody to stop, and you get everyone together and be like, okay, we tried this shot, and you can talk through it, put a pause on everything, and then come back, get everything set up, and then you call action. In our live shows, we're just going continuously throughout the show. So when there's time, obviously during rehearsal, you can preview a lot of things. So I can say, okay, the guitarist, we want to get a close up of the hands. The guitarist is going to be standing stage left. Let's see which camera can get the best shot on that. Yeah. Or, if it's an extended solo, who do I want to be super tight versus maybe waist up and making sure they're not in each other's shots, right? Because there's not a lot of time to give a ton of direction. Like the film example, I have to come up with nicknames for certain shots or give a very quick, say tight shot hand or something. Yeah. Camera 2, tight shot hand. Camera 3, head to toe. Yeah. And there's a lot of trust in the camera operators because they intuitively are going to be making their own decisions based on what they're hearing. And also, I don't want to have to describe every single detail of the shot that I want. I want them to use their best judgment to get the shot. Yeah. And the timing, I've thought a lot about like old school platformers where you've got like Mario and you're waiting for the timing to line up and then you're jumping to the next thing. Yeah. And there's a instinct or intuition related to where people's eyes are moving in the shot when they're taking a breath, what they're doing with their hands, and thinking about, as a human being, what are they focusing on and where is the attention, like their consciousness focused on. For example, like during a show, I mentioned a guitar solo. So like, obviously you want to get closer up to the hands and the fingers when you're doing a guitar solo, but also you do want to come out a little wider and see the expressions on their face and where their eyes are going, whether they're actually looking at their hands or if they're just so like tuned into what they're doing that they're maybe like looking up and just feeling the music. Like this is all contextually related to the focus that they have on the activity that they're doing. And any number of different types of activities that someone's doing on camera, like a stand-up comedy, directing for that is when they're in a really intimate moment, you likely want to be closer up here. It's like you're sitting across from them and get this intimate feeling with them. Yeah. Or if they're doing crowd work or they're asking people if they relate to what they're talking about, you want a shot where you see the comedian and the audience in the same camera shot, so you can get this sense of the human on stage connecting with the humans in the audience. And a lot of it is very intuitive and it's difficult to put into words. Yeah. And it's instinctual.
I imagine I like to relate it to music in the sense that you and the camera operating team, you're a unit, like a band. And just by fact that, you've done this many, many times over, either individually or with this specific group, you understand how to function in the role that you play. You understand the things to do when these situations come up. And it's at the point where you don't really think about it anymore. Like, if a band is playing some rhythm thing, there's a pause and then a big hit on the downbeat. They've done that thousands of times. They understand the feeling and timing involved with that, the things to do. So everyone just kind of knows their part and they know the synchronization already. It's just the specific application for what's happening in front of you. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, and that's one of the challenges of working on a new crew, and it's why a lot of people like working. Excuse me. It's why a lot of people like working with the same people over time, because you develop that trust, and the camera operator understands what you're looking for based on what you've called for in the past on past shows, and like you understand what they're capable of. And I have some shows I go into where I get a sense of like, okay, this camera operator is not very experienced, so I'm just going to have to work around that. I can't expect that they're going to get the shot I need, because based on what I'm experiencing here, I don't think they're going to be able to get it. And and that's just the nature of working with different people on different types of projects.
Yeah, that makes sense. When I think of sessions and the incredibly choreographed dance that happens as you're calling the shots like, hey, camera one, camera two, and then there's Brent on the Steadicam running around somewhere in the middle, but he has to not get whacked in the head by Ben on the jib as the thing is swinging across. But you guys have done this hundreds of times as you kind of choreograph the movement and you get into a flow. So yeah, that experience is huge, especially when you're working with the same team again and again and again.
Yeah, and something that just came up for me is a lot of people come to live where they traditionally have worked in corporate or narrative film, and then they have a ask from a client to do live multi-camera, and so they're coming from this more traditional mode of shooting where you're stopping and pausing, and then you're going into live. And I've heard this sentiment that like, oh, you'll always get a better version when you bring all the cameras in and put it through post-production. And I agree with that to a degree, but I think what a lot of people miss is that when you're live directing, the advantage you have over an editor is you can change the shots.
Yeah.
If, once you're in post-production, obviously you have what you have. So the advantage that a live director has over an editor is you can use your intuition, experience, and instinct to ask for different shots. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people don't lean into that, or maybe don't wrap their hands around that as much as people who work in live.
Now that you've said it, I think that's really obvious. You have the ability to influence and respond based on the things happening in front of you. It sounds so simple, but I've never thought of that before.
Well, that's one of the biggest challenges on stuff. I remember way back, and even that I see now when other people, they do a multi-camera shoot without a technical director, which I totally understand. Sometimes you don't have the budget, but you get into post and you realize, oh, this entire shoot, camera 4 had something in the top left of frame, and camera 2, we can see that orange extension cable in the background. And that's the advantage of having somebody like me or a technical director seeing all the cameras at the same time while you're live.
Yeah.
Is you can notice those things. And like, I was just working with Brent on a comedy special for Peter, the psychic comedian.
Okay.
And we had one camera that was a reverse shot, just set up for the audience. And at first, like, oh, we'll just set it up, we'll record. We don't need to run it to the switcher. We'll just use it in post.
Yeah.
And then I thought about it, and everything I just explained to you came to mind. I was like, no, we have the time. Let's run a cable. And then we noticed, like, we started the show, and Peter started the show, and then he moved the mic stand to his left, put it right into the camera shot. And I noticed that, and we were able to go move that mic so that it wasn't in the shot for the entire performance. But if we hadn't set that camera to the switcher, we wouldn't have known, and that mic stand would have been in the shot the entire time, which would have caused issues later in post-production. So even though we weren't live streaming that ability to monitor the shots while we were filming was very beneficial to the post-production process.
I've run into that exact problem you described dozens of times, and then I find out in post, and then I'm really disappointed because it makes my job in editing so much harder because now I'm down a camera or 2 or however many the problem presented itself. So, okay, you've touched a lot upon the, what you do, how you do it, and things that you experience. What if we took a step back and analyzed it from the business side? Because you mentioned that, you started a lot of this being a freelancer, but you're in the journey of transitioning this into a business owner. What is that transition like for you? And what do you notice the differences of the roles of freelancing versus being the business side? Owning the business side.
So for context, I worked at a company, like I mentioned before, called Varvid from 2010 to 2019 in the same industry that I ended up when I left. I started freelancing in the same industry. So the advantage there is I had a strong understanding of the industry, a portfolio, experience in the industry. So it made getting jobs and gigs a lot easier. I had contacts and a network. And simultaneously, unfortunately for the world, COVID-19 happened, but like fortunately for somebody working in live streaming and virtual events,
huge. Yeah.
I had a lot of opportunity to get jobs. And that's one of the most challenging aspects of being a freelancer, running a business, is lead generation and actually getting the work. I mean, there's so many people that love doing the work. And sometimes the ironic part is like, you wake up wishing you could go to work, but you don't have a job that day.
Yeah.
And that happens often. And so I was fortunate that through 2020 to 2022, had a lot of work and jobs lined up. And I didn't have to think too much about finding work, which was kind of like having the training wheels on when starting out as a freelancer. And I started to think about how can I evolve this into a business? And that's what I've been working on a lot over the last 2 to 3 years. And we've talked a bit about this, and there's so many directions I can go. And it's difficult to talk about too, because you start using vague language. Like you need to figure out how to solve a problem and how to have a value proposition.
Yeah.
And ultimately, what I've been circling around and focusing on is think about like when a business pays for their internet connection, they're never having a meeting when it comes to cut their costs of like, we got to get rid of our internet connection. It doesn't make sense for us to have internet anymore, right? Because it's such an essential thing for them to have. Like
the conversation never happens.
Right. So the thought experiment for me is like, to be successful as a business, how can I get what I offer to be as close as possible to being a utility that's as important as an internet connection or a cell phone bill? And I don't exactly have an answer to that yet, but I have a question that I'm living and working towards, which is working specifically with learning communities that are building membership programs.
Okay.
So that the metric can become how many more people are signing up to become a member and paying the membership dues, and how much are the current members staying members for longer? Like, are we increasing the length of people who are becoming members? Because the big challenge with live streaming is it's often the value is for people is that it didn't crash and it happened and they can move on with it and they don't have to think about it anymore. Like a lot of the stuff that I did, especially during COVID, it's kind of a nuisance for people. It's their boss said they had to do it. They were wearing many different hats in their event or marketing role. And there's not a lot of discussion, particularly about why it's valuable to do and how can it be an investment versus a cost. So that I would say, to wrap it up, evolving from a freelancer to a business is how can you think about what you're offering is an investment for clients and not a line item cost for them.
Yeah. I think that mindset is going to be crucial. And I actually think the industry and the world at large is kind of moving towards that direction. Video is such an immensely powerful tool for almost every facet of people's daily lives and especially businesses. Marketing happens through that. Communities, like you said, happens through that. Dissemination of knowledge, holding events, all of that. So yeah, if you can find a way to make live streaming viewed as a utility as opposed to a cost, I think you've solved the problem.
Yeah, there's this theorist. I don't know if he's a theorist. He's written a book. His name's Ronald Baker. He wrote a book about value-based pricing, another book called Pricing on Purpose. I forget the exact quote, but he talks about like the purpose of a business is not to be as efficient as possible, and it's not necessarily to make money for the shareholders. Really, the most essential part of a business is to make money for the client, or to be so valuable for the client that's an essential part of something that they're spending money on, which is what I touched on earlier as well.
I know you and I are both fans of The Future, Futur, no E. And one of the value-based pricings that he described is like, try to figure out the problem that your client is solving. Let's say it's $100,000 problem, but their budget is $5,000. You can come up to them and be like, so you're only willing to spend $5,000 to solve a $100,000 problem? That seems wildly disproportionate. Here are my services, it's $30,000, but think about what you're getting in all of this. And then the conversation goes from there. It's a really interesting framework to have up to approach those kinds of conversations and approach that problem.
Yeah. And it's a shift in mindset that's hard to overcome, and I'm still working on it. But
so hard.
When you initially, as a freelancer, when you start pricing projects, you typically do what's called like cost-based pricing or cost plus. You add up all your costs, you pick an hourly rate, and then you design the amount you want to charge based off of that, which makes sense. It's you're covering the costs.
Yeah.
But ultimately, when someone's paying for a service, you don't care how much it costs the person that's providing it to you. That doesn't matter to you. What's relevant to you is how it's actually helping you. And that's a mindset that's difficult to get past.
Yeah.
And something that I've been working on a lot, because ultimately, you know, and when that point was made to me, like, I thought about it. I don't ever really care when I'm at a store or at a restaurant or hiring a plumber. Like, I don't necessarily care how much it costs them versus like what's the time it can save me, or what are the alternative like options that I have. Oh, maybe I could go try to do it myself, like a plumbing. Oh, I could go buy the tool for, $50, but like, and watch YouTube, but I'm going to fuck it up. And it's going to take a whole week, and I might flood my whole apartment. So maybe I'll just hire the plumber instead. And
It's whatever resource your client is willing to throw at the problem. Sometimes it's time, but then you don't want them as a client because they're going to be real cheap about it. But sometimes it's money, and they want that problem solved immediately, and they're willing to pay a premium for it. So yeah, it's the value in which you provide. Kind of piggybacking off that. So I'm a photographer by trade, and my normal rate, I guess we're going to date and expose my rates, but my normal rate is about $100 an hour for some live event that I go and shoot. Whereas when I do a wedding, it's almost $300 to $400 an hour. I'm doing more or less the same thing with the same skill set, but it's just such a higher demand of, I can't fuck it up. Ever. You have to be perfect, and it has to work every single time, and that's where all of my experience comes into play, because I've dealt with all of these problems. I know how to mitigate these things. Whereas in a live event, if I don't get the shot, that's fine. I'll get something else that's similar, and it's okay. I'm never going to get the picture of the couple kissing at the altar again. Once that moment passes, it's gone.
Right.
So yeah, it's the different demands based on the things that you deliver.
Well, also the perspective of the person spending the money, which you touched a little bit on, but you could think about what's the value of water. So if you're a little thirsty and you're at home and you can go turn on the faucet and get water, you wouldn't pay for water necessarily.
Yeah.
But if you're, out in the desert and you've been wandering and you're, dehydrated, how much would you pay for a bottle of water there versus your basement's flooding and it's a foot deep and you need to get rid of it? In that sense, you'd pay money for someone to come get the water out of your house. So there's a number of different ways you can relate to something and have a sense of value in your mind, where in that case, it's all relationship to water, but in different ways in the context that, you're related to the water and the situation and environment that it's in.
Yeah. So to pivot a little bit, can you tell me a little bit about the course that you put together for the University of Washington? I'm curious about, how you're creating communities through live streaming.
Yeah. So I attended the program, the communication leadership program at the University of Washington from, let's see if I can remember. 2018 to 2020. And I graduated from there with a master's. And when I was there, I just told everybody I do live streaming. I'm the live streaming guy. I told the head of the department that I wanted to teach a class someday. So I was planting the seed even back then. And
very smart.
2023 struck up the conversation again, and they're like, it's time. We'd love to have you come teach this class. And part of it was they do an annual conference called the Connects Conference. They realized they could benefit from a little more support from students from that. So the design of the class is the final project for students is to produce the live stream for the department's annual conference. And so I taught it for the first time the beginning of this year, which is we're recording this conversation right now in the end of 2024. And so January to March 2024, the first time I taught the class. And it was a unique challenge in that the first time I taught a class and the first time I did a client project, because it's very much like a client project. The department was the client. And the class is structured as a practicum where the students in the class, the objective is to give them a real world perspective on what it's like to work on a project for a client. So that's how the whole class is structured. And it was balancing, how do I make sure I take care of all these project management essential items that I know are relevant and necessary, while taking that and translating it into a curriculum that's teaching people how to do it along the way. And it's that classic, as teacher, I learned more than the students probably. Yeah. And I'm now in the process of designing the second time of teaching the class. And, I'm sure by the time this comes out, I'll probably be, teaching the class. Yeah. And I already have a lot more ideas of how to present it in a much better way. Okay. And there's a lot involved in the class. So I'm, after I've shared all that with you, I'm curious what comes up for you and like which direction, choose your own adventure. What do you want to know more about the class based off that?
I mean, so many things. So I know that it's very difficult to figure out how to, interact with the client, be in that space without really going through it the first time. Because at least for my story, my experience, I had no experience with freelancing. I had a program management job at Microsoft, and then 6 months later, I picked up a camera, and then I figured out how to be a freelance photographer. But no one really taught me. I just watched a bunch of YouTube videos, and I did stuff for free to kind of get that first client interaction. It wasn't for money, but to get my feet wet. But it was just a lot of trial and error. So by fact that you're teaching this in a course to try to simulate these things before people actually get to it in the real world, I think it's huge and is invaluable. So very, very nice.
Thanks. Yeah. And for context, the students in the class are in the marketing communications world. Okay. So they're not necessarily going to go be a camera operator or a technical director. They're going to be more likely to be in a marketing position where their boss asks them to produce a live stream. So the class itself, we used really simple web-based tools. We used StreamYard the first class. I might change it this year to use something like EVMux or Restream. We might use StreamYard again. I'm still testing out different options to see what's most relevant. So the foundational level is, can they go do this very simple remote live streaming where people are calling in remotely and start producing that on their own. And in addition to that, with the things we're covering in the class, if they do get asked to work on a bigger production where they're bringing in a video production vendor with a crew, can they lead that project in a way where they're designing the topics and content they're covering in the show in a way that's relevant and important for their community? And to provide context for that, there's corporate events where they get very distracted on spectacle or little skits or bits. And one particular one, I remember there was a CEO that wanted to ride out on a motorcycle and they had to get the perfect motorcycle sound effect because he wasn't actually starting it. He was just kind of rolling it out there. And so we spent all this time rehearsing this motorcycle movement that's not really relevant to anybody feeling connected to other people and other human beings. And so this class is structured around, how do you put together a show in a way that's meaningful for the people who are attending or watching online, and also in a way that is more connected to live streaming, particularly as a unique medium. And what I mean by that is, a lot of people, when they start creating content on YouTube, like this show, you'll go look at YouTubers that are successful and you'll look at that format and you'll mimic it. And people do the same with photography on Instagram or short form on TikTok. But a lot of people, when they go do a live stream, they don't tap into the creator economy and go see what people are doing on Twitch. They follow something more traditional that they've seen on TV, or that's a more corporate panel discussion. And so I'm really encouraging the students, especially the second time around, of thinking about what it means to be live on a platform like Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, TikTok, versus live on a television station.
Yeah.
And there's a big mindset shift there that I'm working with.
I would love to dig into that mindset shift because I imagine that applies to, millennials on the older end, Gen Z, Gen Alpha. Like the platforms that they're familiar with are Facebook and TikTok and Instagram and Snapchat and Twitch and all that stuff. It's not, broadcast television. And the approaches and the culture and the style behind all of these things are vastly different. And I think the future is in these new platforms, Facebook, Twitch, Instagram, that kind of stuff. What are some of the things that you see culturally between the two? And also, what do you see the differences in execution being?
Yeah. An analogy I've been thinking a lot about lately and still refining is a lot of people think of a live stream like a show on a stage when it's actually more like a booth at a conference or a market.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is like typically people think they hear live stream and they're like, okay, we got to get this perfectly segmented, polished show. And then we're going to put it up and we're going to fill the audience up. They're going to sit, they're going to patiently wait for the show to start. They're going to watch the entire thing. And then they're all going to stand up and applaud at the end. And what's actually more realistic is these platforms like Instagram, YouTube, LinkedIn, TikTok, people are scrolling around and jumping around looking at different things the same way that when you're at a festival or a conference, you're walking around looking at different booths and thinking about this live stream in a way where you're not expecting people to watch the entire thing, and that's okay. But just like having a booth at a conference, you hope they stop by, interact for a little bit, and leave having a better understanding of what you're all about. And so that's one of the main aspects, is thinking about it more like a booth at a conference instead of a show on a stage. And the other aspect is the what Gary Vaynerchuk calls the TikTokification of social media. And a lot of people have noticed this. And that's the fact that short form content has completely dominated all of the things that we watch. And Twitch streamers build their careers off of this. And Colin and Samir have this really great video. They're creators on YouTube that make content about creators and the creator economy.
Okay. Yeah.
And they have this video called "Live Streaming is Boring. Here's Why It Works." And they dig even deeper into the fact that Twitch streamers segment and design their shows specifically to make clips later.
Yeah,
and
that makes sense.
More people watch the clips than the actual live stream. And that's the whole point. And that's a big thing that people don't think about. They think about, we're going live from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. We want to get as many people to watch live as possible. And I'm not saying you should not focus on that at all, but like to only focus on live viewership completely misses the valuable aspect, especially in the fact that more people are going to watch short form content anyways.
Yeah.
Because you should really think about what kind of exciting moments can we have, in an NFL game. It's the touchdown, right?
Yeah.
Like what kind of touchdown or interception moments can we have in this show that will make great short form content later? And how do we get as many short form clips that help the world understand the story we're trying to tell or the people in our community? And that's the real value. So that'd be the two main things: thinking of it like a booth at a conference, and how can you get as much short form content out of the long form content as possible.
The booth at a conference thing, you're right. I've never thought about it like that, but it makes perfect sense. I watch a lot of StarCraft videos, and I watch a lot of, people live streaming themselves playing StarCraft. And I'll tune in for like, I don't know, an hour here as I'm digging around doing something else. I'm not intending to watch it from start to finish. There's not going to be this big payoff at the end. But I get to watch them, play a couple games here and there, and it's fun, it's exciting. There's that whole parasocial relationship. And then once I'm done with my thing, I click off and I move on to the next thing. But it's transient, and I'm not staying for defined moments of it. I just like to be around as it's happening.
Yeah, there's a sociologist named T.L. Taylor, and she wrote a book called Watch Me Play, Twitch and the Rise of Live Streaming, or Twitch and the Rise of Game Live Streaming, something like that. And by now it's a little outdated. A lot of the principles apply, but she talked about, it's like the six ways people watch live streaming, something like that. And I can't memorize them all, but one of them was the ambient aspect. Like sometimes you just want it on because the nature of somebody playing a game, talking to the chat, emotionally, you just feel like you have this open sense of like, oh, there's this world out there and there's other people out there living their lives, doing their things in their homes, and they have this on. It makes you feel connected to the human race just by the fact that you're experiencing this thing in real time as other people are too. So you're not necessarily like sitting down watching it like you'd watch a movie, and it's okay that you're not watching it like that.
Yeah. And then, you know, by definition of you're all watching the same thing, it's all centered around a common interest. So there's a community there as well. It's funny that you mentioned the short form content because I watched, I don't know, 3 hours of this dude's live stream. And then I also watched his other content that he posts, you know, short form or videos. And as I was watching, just some audio cues popped in, and I noticed he said the same couple things. And then I started paying attention just a little bit more. I'm like, oh, wait a second. This 15-minute video was directly pulled from this live stream that I just watched. They just clipped, you know, the most exciting parts of it, and then they reposted it. I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. As a creator, you know, you get to double dip a little bit, and that's fantastic.
Entire channels that are built on just making clips that aren't associated with the original creator. And I know Hassan Piker on Twitch is a political commentator. He gets more views than some of the major news channels.
Yeah.
And he doesn't have a team putting out clips for himself. He relies solely on other people.
Okay.
And they make the clips and they build their own YouTube channels. And some of them, I don't have exact numbers, but like are making a living off of this, just the post-production and making clips of the original creator. And for the creator, they benefit because their character, their story, their personality is getting out in front of a lot more people, and they don't have to be involved in the post-production at all. And so, which in turn lends itself to more people showing up on their Twitch channel, potentially subscribing, or them getting speaking engagement, brand deals, just because they're more recognized online because of the work of other people and other teams.
So there's two directions I want to take the conversation. I'll hit one and then the other. From a culture side of live streaming, I know this is both anecdotal evidence and then what I've seen online, but anecdotally talking to some people like in Gen Alpha, Gen Z, you know, a long time ago, people used to grow up and they're like, I want to be an astronaut. I want to be a firefighter. I want to be whatever, or a rock star. But nowadays it's, I want to be a Twitch streamer. I want to be, you know, a live streamer. I want to, you know, do X, Y, and Z in the live streaming space. Culturally, I think that's a huge shift to where, you know, these streamers, they essentially become celebrities and they're held in very high regard. They have a massive following behind them. What do you think are some of the cultural implications of live streaming and what that means for the future?
In terms of the young people being drawn for that to be their profession versus wanting to be a doctor or an astronaut?
I mean, I would say, you know, the place that live streaming has in society, as opposed to, you know, like career paths for people, although I guess they could be related.
Okay. Yeah. I'm thinking, I mean, there's a lot of directions.
Of course,
go. So when we're talking about like live streaming is a medium for connecting with people, and there's an authenticity to it in the sense that you know that it's happening right now. I think that's sometimes when the production value is too good, there'll be speculation in the chat. Oh, this is pre-recorded.
Yeah.
And it's a kind of a double, it's like a paradoxical thing that being on the production crew, there's a sense of pride that the thing you're making is so good, people think it's pre-recorded.
Yep.
But you don't want people to think it's pre-recorded because that defeats the whole purpose of being live.
You want it to be a little rough.
Right, because you want that authenticity. And when I say authenticity, I mean you want people to feel like they can poke it and it'll shape the direction that it's going, right? They want to be able to throw in their opinion or their experience and for the person on camera to read it or reference it. And maybe it'll become an inside joke ongoing that this particular user in the chat has a certain perspective that's different from somebody else. And now the show's going on a whole different direction than anticipated because of what happened in the chat and any number of variations on that. So that aspect is kind of going back to that analogy of setting up a booth at a conference, and that people want to feel like if and when they participate, that it's meaningful. And this is reminding me of Charles Vogel. He writes about community. There's this book called The Art of Community, which is one of my favorite books. And he actually has a new edition coming out in March of next year. I've pre-ordered it already. And he has this concept of invitation versus announcement.
Okay.
And so an invitation is, hey, Jason, I've been really great to get to know you over the last few years. Like, I always love working with you, but we've never really hung out. So we should get together. I'm having some people over and we're going to have a pizza party. I'd love for you to be there. I want you to meet my friend Mike. Like, that's a very personal invitation because it's directed to you versus an announcement. It's like, hey, everybody, I'm having a pizza party. You should all come over. And a lot of media or the way people publish online is more of an announcement. And you could see how that invitation is much more directed towards somebody and gives them a sense that it's meaningful for them to participate and be involved. And live streaming as a medium, more meaningful, like when done well, gives people a sense more of invitation than announcement, like a pre-recorded video that can't interact with you the way that a live stream can. So how does that fit into society? I think there's a lot of questions about what does it mean for humanity when technology like AI is reaching this point where you can't tell if things are real or not.
Yeah.
You don't know if the thing you're reading was actually written by a person, or the ethics of who created this, who gets the credit. There's a lot of questions swirling around. And just for context, I really like AI, so I'm not like against it. But as a side effect of that, or as a result of that, I think people are going to more and more crave something that feels more connected and authentic. And I see the possibility of live streaming and really niche community spaces online to foster places where people can feel more connected to each other and feel that sense of invitation to places, whether it's during the live stream or a platform like, there's platforms like, I mean, a lot of people use Discord or Slack. There's also dedicated platforms like circle.so that are becoming more popular, where it's just like a social media site, but it's your own platform. Kind of like traditionally what an email newsletter has been, except instead of sending emails out to people, you're hosting a whole social media site where you have different groups and channels and people can create profiles. Circle.so is one channel. School.com, SKOOL.com is another version of that. And there's others like Mighty Networks. And so what I see is, I'm not Nostradamus, but I see the possibility that more people are going to be drawn to go to the very specific, fly fishing online community, or organic gardening, or home cooking, like a very specific niche interest that they have where they're connecting with very specific people.
Yeah.
And then also getting access to educational resources through live streaming and published content within these communities.
Yeah.
Rather than the very broad experience you get on a place like Instagram or TikTok, where it's kind of like everything all at once and so many different options. I think you're going to see people gravitating towards more narrowly defined and niche places where they feel they can be more of their authentic self. So does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I was always curious in your thoughts on that, because live streaming, as like you said, a medium it has so much potential impact. So the other question that I wanted to ask is, it's the democratization of being able to get your message out in the world in the past, 20 years has been absolutely huge. Because before, to live stream, you had to be a media company. You had to be a news network. You had to have a platform with a fuck ton of money behind you just to even get your message out there. Regardless of what the message is, just the ante to have the opportunity to do that was so high. But now, I can just hop on Twitch and, in, minutes less, I can, be talking to any number of people who decide to tune in. So that democratization is huge. So what do you think that means for live streaming as a medium? Because the ante is so low now. The traditional, companies that had the power and the leverage and all of this, their power is dissipated and it's in the hands of a bunch of people. So the opportunity is there. What do you think that opportunity of live streaming means to the average person who wants to get into it?
I'm trying to think about a way to talk about this that isn't something people have heard already.
Sure.
Because I think that there's an awareness. I mean, with everything on social media, people are aware that it's easier to get in front of people. And there's a sense which that's great for a lot of people, like a freelancer, someone trying to start a business. It's way easier to raise awareness that the fact that you even exist. And also people also know that means there's more noise online too. Because since anybody can share anything, there's a lot more people sharing content online that maybe muddies the water. So there's trying to balance that signal to noise ratio. There may be more noise online than we actually need, and it can be more difficult to find the actual signal that you're trying to tune into. And that's where algorithms can be helpful. That's where TikTok has been successful, where traditionally content would be recommended to you socially based on your social network. And the real innovation of TikTok was it was more interest based. I mean, YouTube did that a little bit, but TikTok just took that to a new level of really dialing in. I don't know how it works, right? But I know the algorithm that their unique intellectual property that drives that algorithm is getting people content based on their interests and less based on the number of followers someone has. And that's something Gary Vaynerchuk talks about, where traditionally most social media platforms, the more followers you get, the more you could rely on each new post you do getting more views or likes or comments.
Yeah.
Because it's based on the amount of followers you have. But now on TikTok, since it's interest based, there is more of a democratization there, that people with smaller followings have more of an opportunity for something to blow up or for something to get more views. Now, to talk about live streaming specifically and what does it mean culturally? Maybe I'm too close to it because I'm not thinking of, nothing's immediately jumping out besides the obvious things. I think that, something that's coming to mind is that a lot of the huge companies are very buttoned up, polished. A lot of things are kept behind closed doors. There's huge committees approving anything that wants to be published. And what we're seeing is creators can start their own brands easily and compete with huge organizations. And like one example is, kind of an obvious example is Mr. Beast and Feastables, a snack company that he started, able to compete against Hershey's.
Yeah.
Because now this is an extreme example. Nobody really compares to Mr. Beast, but going to the extreme to make the point is that it's easier for him to start selling chocolate because he has 300 something million subscribers on YouTube. Mm-hmm. Now on a smaller scale, there's Emma Chamberlain on YouTube. I don't know her super well, but she's got a significant following, not Mr. Beast size, but she started Chamberlain Coffee. And so because she has a following, she's able to now design a product and bring it into the market and get people to start buying it. Yeah. Whereas previously you had to have the company and the product that generated income that then could get you to a position where you could afford to pay for the media to get marketing and raise awareness. And so the way that live streaming fits into that is I think it'll become easier for people with more of an entrepreneurial mindset to incorporate the medium of live streaming into the way that they get other people aware of what it is that they offer and what they're doing. And so I don't know if this is I don't think it's much of a novel idea that I'm sharing here, but I do see that it will be part of that story that's unfolding, particularly as we see more and more people turning to gig work and the economic divide between the wealthy and the people who are not wealthy. The opportunity that, me personally have noticed for myself is that all of these huge companies with money, they still spend money on services.
Yeah.
So if you can design some kind of service, product, way of bringing something into the marketplace that these companies with a lot of money need, there's opportunity in that gig work to make a decent living through the perspective of being a little more entrepreneurial than somebody was just taking a job, going to their job and going home. And so I think that my hope, and referencing the future with Chris Do, their whole mission is to help, their big picture is they're helping creative people start businesses. And the big picture is helping 1 billion people make a living doing what they love. And I've been really drawn to that. And I see the possibility of more people actually being able to run their own business. Okay. Is kind of the big picture story. So that was a lot I just threw at you.
No,
I think it all kind of makes sense. Yeah.
No, it does. To reference something that you mentioned earlier, a couple things that you mentioned earlier, the community that you can build around an individual, a brand, a business, that is huge now, because I can't remember the name of the study, but it's essentially like if you interact with someone for like 7 hours, you consider yourself to be good friends.
Yeah, the 7-11-4 thing, the Google study.
Yeah. But online with that parasocial relationship of, you creating content for your personal brand, your business, whatever, if you put enough content out there and if a person consumes that enough, it scratches that itch. So now you have that parasocial relationship where you've established the relationship. They trust you. They like the content that you have. And where I think live streaming is particularly powerful is, you mentioned earlier, a viewer can watch the live stream, they can poke it, and ideally something happens. That interaction is paramount because now the relationship feels real. You have influence in a two-way street and you can communicate back and forth, as opposed to you're just watching and consuming a video and whatever you do, nothing happens on the other side. So yeah, I think those are my big takeaways from learning about live streaming and what you shared so far.
Yeah, there's a author, thinker named David Spinks, and he wrote a book called The Business of Belonging, and he's been publishing on Substack a series about emergent communities or emergence in communities. And one of the biggest ideas that I took away was when trying to build a community, focus on building containers and not community.
Okay. Because
people will naturally socialize and build communities. It's just what we do. But if you provide the skeleton or the container for people to fill, then that community will emerge naturally. And I think that, back to what I was talking about, invitation earlier, if you are in a live stream or producing a live stream or going live in a way, it's kind of like you're opening up this portal, this temporary space, which is a temporary container that people can serendipitously happen across or happen upon and get to know you in a way that maybe they wouldn't have if they watched a video on YouTube, because they can throw something in the chat and you can immediately start talking about it.
Right.
So they can, what is the best way to communicate this? That's not generic or vague, and that's always my feedback to ChatGPT. This is too generic and vague. We need to get more concrete here.
Yeah.
And I guess this, for me personally, this is one of the things that's most helpful about the class I'm teaching is it's putting me in a position where I'm getting all these ideas out of my head and really hammering them out. And ultimately, I'd like to write a book, get that published. So what you're seeing me is like in the early stages of realizing points where I'm not clear and concrete and I want to improve. Yeah.
I mean, that's the journey, right? We're never going to have all of the puzzle pieces that we need at the moment that we need them. We're going to build them and find them over time.
Totally.
Okay. There's one thing that you mentioned earlier that I wanted to ask. So you talked about the invitation versus announcement thing. So to reiterate, when I invited you to this podcast, I came to you directly. I said, Richard, I really appreciate your knowledge and your expertise in this area. I find it fascinating. I would love to have you here. As opposed to, a Facebook post, I said, hey, I have this podcast. Anyone who wants to apply, apply. So I specifically asked you here. Um, how can live streaming offer a medium to where you can push your message out in one to many as more of an invitation as opposed to an announcement? Is there something in that that can be done? Is there a method or a tool that you found within live streaming that can accomplish that?
I've been brainstorming analogies. So
Okay.
instead of directly answering it, I can say something like when you go to an improv show,
Yeah.
they are asking for recommendations and insights from the audience to shape, where are we? What was your first job? And someone might say Subway. And they're like, okay, we're in a Subway.
I see.
But, and like, what is what's the scariest thing that's ever happened to you? And they're like, oh, I almost got robbed. And it's like, okay, we're in a Subway and someone's coming in to rob it. They start piecing together the story in collaboration with the audience.
Yeah.
But they've also rehearsed to have a sense of story structure. So they all the actors and improvisers have an agreement tacitly, like between each other, of like, okay, we're going to have a beginning, middle, and end of the story. And no matter the different variables that come into it, we have an intuitive way that we're going to navigate telling a story with all of these things that are being added to it. So
Okay.
like that, if you go into translating that to a live stream, is having a sense of what your beginning, middle, and end is going to be, but don't script it out.
Okay.
Don't write a teleprompter. The same way a football team has a book of plays and they'll call a play, but then they get up to the line, the quarterback might notice something and call an audible. And then when they actually hike the ball and the receivers start running their route,
Yeah.
and the quarterback has to scramble, the wide receiver notices, hey, I ran my route. It's done yet, but it's done now. But now I got to run over there and try to get open. Like,
Right.
you need to be prepared, or not even need, like you should be ready to just naturally follow the interesting things that are sparking your curiosity throughout, and not try to narrowly stay on a very tightly defined track.
Okay. I like that analogy because this perspective shift helped. When you had the invitation versus announcement thing, I was thinking of people as individuals. Jason, Richard. But when you mentioned the crowd working thing, it's really the audience as a group, cohesive units that you're pulling ideas and input from. It's not, hey, John in seat 2, row 3, but it's like, hey, person who had this experience, can you chime up and speak to this thing? Oh, cool. And then then you put another archetype and someone answers. That makes a lot more sense to me.
Or like stand-up comedians will do that a lot. We see that's huge now. And talking about
Yeah,
short-form
yeah.
content is the crowd work. And they'll often reference somebody they talked to previously if a pattern emerges.
Yeah.
Right. So if they're talking about something embarrassing that happened on a first date over here with Susan or whatever, they're talking to someone over here, and then later in the show they're talking to somebody else and they mention a first date. Like, oh yeah, just like what happened to her, right? And
Right,
like
the callbacks.
and what it starts to weave in this sense of shared experience that makes everybody feel more connected to the story, because it's like before this show existed tonight, or before we were here witnessing this, there weren't these little reference points, and they've been added in extemporaneously.
Yeah.
And through the natural interaction, communication between people.
Mhm.
And there's a sense, even though it may not have been you personally, you have this intuition that if you did, it would also become one of those things. So even if it doesn't happen, there's still this open sense that it could happen,
Yeah.
which is one of the exciting parts about live, is that anything could happen.
So throughout our conversation, I was trying to figure out why you latched onto building community out of live streaming. And I didn't know at the beginning, but I definitely know now. What I distill is that live streaming, like you said, it's a tool, it's a utility. But the real value on the other side is community. Just like, I don't care how Facebook works. I just know all of my friends are there and I get to hang out with them virtually. And Facebook allows me to go do that. So, what I'm understanding is community is the real value here, and live streaming is a tool that allows people to access that community. Is that a good takeaway, or would you like to correct something there?
The challenging thing about talking about community is that it's kind of vague. And when I've been talking about people who work, like there's people professionally who are community designers, right? But everybody in their everyday life can say, I have a community, I have my family and friends. And so Charles Vogel defines it as something like people who have a mutual care and concern for a particular topic and for each other. And that can apply very broadly in a number of different things. But what's useful is he also talks about mirage communities. A lot of big brands will mention their community when it's just like people who follow their Instagram page because they're hoping to get a coupon, right?
Yeah,
that's not necessarily a community, but it's kind of a warm, fuzzy word people like to use because it makes them feel good.
Yeah,
and especially big brands will throw around the word community when it's not actually people connecting with each other. It's very transactional to a degree. Whether that example, they're trying to get the Black Friday deal, so they're commenting on a post because they were told to say that, and so the way that live streaming relates to that is let's talk a little bit about big brands being more polished and buttoned up. Live streaming, a lot of those brands will go live and read from a teleprompter, stay on script, and that's one of the formats where it's easiest to tell that someone's staying on script. So when somebody is authentic on a live stream, it's easier to intuitively understand that they're being real. Yeah. And so that's where that medium, I think, is really powerful, and where is actually to the advantage of people who are like us versus a big CEO at a multinational corporation.
Yeah.
Because people will feel more connected to the individuals or creators who are actually authentically sharing themselves with the world versus the ones that are very obviously sidestepping questions or not addressing things head on, or obviously reading a teleprompter or telling a rehearsed line. And this actually, a lot of the criticism in the last presidential election was that, regardless of like political beliefs and everything, was that Donald Trump seemed more authentic because of appearing on a bunch of podcasts versus Harris seemed to to be more on script and not deviating from talking points.
Yeah.
And without diving too deep into a deep analysis of the whole political spectrum, I think that there was truth in the fact that somebody willing to just say whatever was on their mind, regardless of maybe how damaging or offensive was, there was a cathartic aspect of people relating to Donald Trump.
They want that rawness.
Because it just was like, oh yeah, he's obviously doesn't seem like he's hiding things.
Yeah, this is the perception.
The perception of it, because like, oh, he's saying whatever's on his mind. Like that's, I can relate to that. I wish more politicians would do that. And which is kind of funny because I was just talking about major corporations and like there's whole thing we could dive into how Donald Trump is, but it's the angle there is like he's so instinctually tuned into being on camera that he's able to skillfully present that authenticity, and also in a way that a lot of CEOs or other more buttoned up corporate executives don't do it the way that he does. And I guess that's enough about Donald Trump. I don't need to go down that whole road. I just wanted to touch point there because a lot of people are calling it the podcast election.
Sure. Yeah.
Where there was, was it? I'll probably get the presidents wrong and reveal my ignorance, but I think it was Kennedy and Reagan.
I have no idea.
I'd have to look it up. But essentially, it was the first televised presidential debate.
Oh, okay.
And Kennedy looked very polished and presentable on camera, and the opponent, I should look this up so I say the right thing, but essentially the other person in the debate was sweating and looked a little nervous, whereas previously, that being broadcast on radio, you would never pick up
know
on
the
that.
difference, the medium, yeah.
But the fact that it was on television and people could visually see that swayed the presidential election.
Yeah.
In the same way that Donald Trump, and Colin and Samir again did a really great video essay about this, of the number of views of Donald Trump on podcasts versus Kamala Harris is just astronomical.
Yeah.
Because his willingness to just go anywhere for the most part.
That is fascinating.
And just, I think that there's a lot of similarities between live streaming and long form video podcasting. It's just the fact that you're doing it long form. Yeah. And there's more opportunity for a discussion to unfold when you're doing something for a longer period of time. Yep. And to not dive too much into Donald Trump, but the results of the election and the way that played out and the way that people are analyzing the relationship to long form video podcast reflects the way the media landscape connects with the people in their day-to-day life, the same way that the first televised presidential debate reflected the media landscape at that time.
So I've only loosely followed the association between podcasting and the elections and, how the viewership skewed and all that. Fascinating stuff. I mean, long form content is such a powerful medium. It's one of the reasons why I started this very podcast, because you get to really have the stories breathe a little bit. You can kind of tell a more nuanced and succinct message because you have that longer time to explain things. You can let concepts sit and digest, and it's nice. So a closing tradition that we have on the show is the previous guest leaves a question for the current guest, not knowing who the current guest may be. And the question that is left for you is, what is one nugget of information about your industry that you learned that really changed your perspective on everything?
Nugget of information that changed my perspective.
Yeah, if you want, I can go first with my example, or you can say yours.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to think about, because there's different angles. I mean, there's stuff that maybe I learned early on that I could apply to. And I think earlier when I was sharing the fact that it's really like the onus is on you when you're coming into a crew, particularly a new team, to figure out what's going on. Like, you can't expect anybody to tell you what's going on. And if you do have a good producer, you're lucky for somebody to actually clue you in on what it is you're responsible for. But I would say for me personally, where I'm trying to pave my own path is that, particularly in live events and live streaming, the focus is really just on executing the thing and getting it over with. And it felt like I was stuck in that world of how can I have a valuable company if I try to offer live streaming and now I'm just another vendor doing live streaming.
Right.
That when someone has an event scheduled, they'd talk to me and 5 other companies and then choose the cheapest option or whatever, whoever like reminds them of their best friend or whatever it is, those things that makes people choose something. And so for me, I started focusing on how can I find something that's valuable at what I do and do it in a way that only I can do it.
Yeah.
And so the nugget for me was joining the Future Pro Group, joining a platform like Circle.so. And that was an epiphany for me that online platforms like that even existed and that learning communities like that specifically existed. And that's where this question of what's valuable for doing live streaming is not just how many people you're getting watching while you're live, but how can you build up those community spaces over time by getting people to join and commit to, from what they experience in the show, take action to go join and interact on an ongoing way between shows. So that's the unique thing that I'm carving out for myself. And I guess you can let me know if I properly answered the question or not.
I think so. Yeah. How I interpret it from the last guest is there's I guess a phrase or a saying that gave me a perspective shift. So to answer the question, I'm a photographer by trade, and the phrase is the frame is more important than the picture, which is kind of a twist on beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So let's say you have a picture that say, there's a man in a tuxedo and there's a woman in a wedding dress. If you see that picture in a frame at a Goodwill, you don't care about that picture. It really doesn't matter. It's just a man in a tuxedo and a woman in a wedding dress. But if that's a picture of your wedding, it is massive because it's not what the picture is of, it's what it represents, the frame in which the picture exists. So when I thought about that, because I realistically, like, your photography skills, there's a plateau. You get so good and then incredibly diminishing returns at the end. And the way that I can keep increasing my value is understanding that it's not my technical execution, it's what emotion is invoked by that image. So it doesn't have to be tack sharp, it doesn't have to have the perfect composition, it doesn't have to have the perfect lighting. It's what the image represents and the emotion behind it. So that was the perspective shift for me, that nugget of truth that about my industry that changed things for me.
Yeah, I like that. That actually made me think of a way I could answer your question differently. So you're talking about different people will bring a different perspective on like what that frame is, right? Or the why behind it or why it's meaningful. And I was thinking about Priya Parker is an author and she works in conflict resolution. And she wrote a book called The Art of Gathering. And she has this idea, this concept that a category is not a purpose when it comes to a gathering. So like the wedding is the category or a town hall event or a funeral, but that's not the purpose that you're gathering with people. And a lot of times there's a certain format of a wedding or a birthday party, and people just start going through the motions of like, this is what you do for a birthday party. This is what you do for a wedding. And in live streaming, this is what you do for a town hall event, or this is what you do when you're live streaming. And when you're talking about that relationship of the frame, like the purpose is really dependent on the context of the people involved and the community. And that often gets overlooked, that people start doing what they think is required for the category that they've defined that their event is, and they don't ask questions about why are we even doing this and what do we hope it accomplishes. So that's a big secret that came to me in terms of a nugget of wisdom that I can think about related to my industry.
Okay, cool. No, thank you for sharing. This whole conversation has been absolutely wonderful, and I've learned quite a bit about both you, the live streaming industry, and just different perspectives on how to look at things. It's fantastic. Thank you. Where can people find you, and where would you like to draw people's attention to?
Yeah, I'm most active on LinkedIn. Funny enough, that's where I post the most. So Richard Angelo McLean on LinkedIn. You could find me there. And Instagram at Richard Angelo McLean. That's my second most active platform. So those would be the two main places that you could find me.
Awesome. Yeah, I will put the links to that in the description box down below. Richard, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate your insight. Thank you.
Of course. Thanks for having me, man.
Cheers.